The $1 Million Pool, a project that has garnered many mixed responses. It seems that everyone either seems to love it or hate it, to each their own. Now, many of you were saying, wow, you built a giant ugly concrete block and you're done. No, we are not done with the $1 Million Pool. It's about 75% of the way done. And right now it's on pause because we have a whole phase 2 of this project, which is comprised of over 3,000 square feet of multiple additions. We're also renovating the existing 4,000 square foot main house. And it all starts right beside the $1 Million Pool. Right here is over 20 feet tall of foundations. We have excavated hundreds of tons of earth, brought in just about the same of fill dirt. There's over 2,000 sandbags just in the top 4 feet that the final slab will sit on. But for now, let me take you back to where we left off at the $1 Million Pool. Looking at the renderings, it's quite deceiving. You can't really grasp the scale of just how tall the foundation is in phase 2. It's about 20 feet from the bottom of grade to the top of our foundation. So obviously, step 1, we need to get in there and excavate. So as you can clearly tell, this lot is not flat, it's very sloped. So you see the guys trenching. What they're doing is they're following our foundation plan, which is basically showing us the perimeter of our whole foundation. And in the perimeter of any foundation, you have what's called a grade beam. And a grade beam, all that is a very deep part where the interior of this slab might only be 4 to 6 inches, but a grade beam is going to be 30 plus inches on the low side. In a foundation like this, we have massive retaining walls that are acting as those grade beams. Going down at the lowest portion, we have to dig down for footers under those retaining walls. And the guys are simply just following a dimension plan. We actually have the survey company come out, mark where our setbacks are, where we can't be. We also have what's called a public utility easement for power lines. So we have to be 7.5 feet away from that. If we're inside of that, they would make us rip it out. And just for a frame of reference, it took about 2 weeks of just solid excavating before we did anything else. What you're looking at here is an interlocking web of rebar. And a lot of the times you're gonna see this flat on the ground, what's called a rebar mat, when they pour a foundation on grade. But with a retaining wall, it's the same premise, but we're going vertical. So as you can see, these are about 12 feet tall in our higher sections. We're pouring these walls in 8-foot sections up to 20 feet tall. All of the rebar, the spacing, the sizing, how it's tied together. We have corner details for what's called corner bars. So those rebars are kind of boomerang shaped that go around the corner. And this is all to be like stitching that is going to be inside of our concrete to hold it all together. So the first thing we do is we get all that rebar in. We get it all inspected by our engineer to check all of the sizing, the corner bars, the depth of those footers at the bottom. And just like the pool, we're going with those snap ties, lots of plywood, lots of bracing, lots of 2x4s, and we are building a very, very strong wall because we do not want this thing to move at all. And not only do we not want it to move, it needs to be strong enough to hold the weight of all the concrete that we're gonna pour inside of it. Okay, the next step is to pour concrete. And if you saw our earlier videos, this concrete pour on this day did not end well. We got the boom pump out there, but since we were so close to the power lines and it started to be very, very humid, it started drizzling on us, we were pouring in those walls and we could hear sparking. That means an electric charge was building. This is not good. We thought if we were a minimum distance away from it, we would be fine. We tried to push through, but at a certain point, you just cut your losses. Human safety is always the most important thing. So we called off the pour. We got the boom pump out of there. It was a very depressing day, but guess what? We lived to fight on. So we rescheduled the pour. We didn't use the boom pump this time. we used a regular old line pump. And this is a little bit tricky because we're pumping all of that stuff uphill, but we had to do it with the proximity to that power line, and the next pour was fully successful. Okay, so now a lot of the tedious work has been done. We've dug all of our beams, we got our rebar in, we set our forms, and now we have some beefy retaining walls that are gonna set the stage for all the next phases of this pour. Okay, now this step is a rinse and repeat. We're gonna break all of the wooden forms inside and out. We're building up another 8-foot section of rebar. So in our tallest section, we're gonna have about 16 feet tall of rebar. The first 8 feet is that already poured wall. We're building up the rebar. We're gonna build up more forms, and we're getting ready to pour the next stage wall. All right, another pour day. We have the line pump out there. We had one big concrete vibrator on site. The concrete vibrator is very important because we put that down in the bottom as we're pouring so that it can shake. It vibrates really hard and it gets all of the air pockets out so that we have nice concrete and there's no voids in those walls as they go up. But lo and behold, we got the vibrator stuck, and this is our big one. And honestly, this sucked. Sometimes you get it snagged and you can pull it out within a few minutes, but this time it was buried all the way down in there, and that vibrator worked itself all the way under the rebar horizontally. So we were trying to pull it up vertically, but it was stuck like feet and feet below, and we could not find it. And this is all the way down in the bottom where we have wood forms on the outside and then fresh concrete being poured. We tried. We said, you know what? We gotta just cut open the form on the outside. And this sucks because you literally see dollars just shooting out the side of your form. But we have concrete trucks that are down below, thousands and thousands of dollars, and the time is ticking. You can only have them sit for about an hour because once that concrete hardens, if you ruin a whole truck, it's like $10,000 just to get it all out of there, not to mention all the concrete dollars that you lose. So the clock is ticking, all hands on deck. We're ripping open those forms, we're trying to find it, and hallelujah, we find it at the bottom, but man, it is still a bunch of work. We're using pry bars to try to get it out. We're yanking it from the top. We are doing everything that we can, and finally we get it unstuck. And man, it's just like these little issues. When you're doing these massive projects, these issues come in and day out. And these are the things that can drag a project on. So despite some issues, the concrete pour went very well. And now we have a 16-foot tall wall, and we're getting ready for the next step to start bringing in fill dirt, using those sonotubes to form up our piers. Okay, now, just like the $1 million pool, we have to bring in a massive amount of fill. We're talking hundreds of tons. And if you look at how close this phase 2 foundation is to the pool itself. We are in tight working conditions. Only the Mini X can fit in there. So first you see Victor, he's just building up a path to where he can get the Mini X around inside these retaining walls so that he can start moving some of this dirt around. The thing that is helpful is we remove so much earth just for the pool foundation that our engineer said we can reuse a lot of that, at least in the bottom portion of the retaining walls, up to a certain point where we need to start using select fill and then compacting that really tight. But for now, we're moving a bunch of rocks and a bunch of earth to just get this bottom layer done. As we're doing that, we're having to dig down to a certain point for our piers. We have to put a number of piers inside of this foundation because from up top, you look at the roof and then down to the walls, and then there's certain areas called point loads. And all a point load is where weight is coming down from the very top of the roof all the way down to the foundation. So we have these piers sitting on big footers at the bottom that are coming all the way up to the top of our foundation. So a point load will land directly on that pier. Another thing that you're starting to see is they're using bags. So they're bagging up the dirt and the earth around these areas where we are putting in rebar and a sonotube to make up these piers all the way through. So now as we're advancing, we're getting to a point where you can see the color of the earth change. That is select fill. That's gonna be more compacted to our engineer's specs. And then we're using sandbags. And we're bagging up those areas to form this pattern of where our grade beams are gonna be. So those bagged areas are the higher areas in which it's only 4 to 6 inches for the top slab. But in between them, those voids, there's a few feet, and that's where our grade beams are gonna be. So when the concrete fills those voids, they're gonna be thicker areas to help with point loads, to also just have lateral bracing to keep this whole foundation from moving side to side, front to back. We used over 2,000 bags of earth just in this foundation. So imagine we have the $1 million pool with hundreds and hundreds of tons of fill, and then we have the secondary foundation next to it that in comparison isn't quite as big, but think about 2,000 bags. I mean, this is just wild, and the amount of work that is going into this is just nuts. You'll also see that they're building up an outer form to where that's gonna be the edge of when we're pouring new. Right up next to those grade beams and sandbags, we're gonna be pouring all throughout there, pouring our piers, and then finally, we're gonna pour the final top slab to where we can start framing that 2-story addition. Check out the last month's worth of work in this 30-second time lapse. All right, so that takes us to where we're at today. In the next video, we're gonna be meeting on site with our plumbers. Now that we have all of this bagged up and everything's nice and tidy, the plumbers are gonna come in and they're gonna wreck it all, and they're gonna dig trenches, and we're gonna get all of our plumbing in. These are our main trunk lines, our giant drain lines through, which is called the plumbing rough. And this is anything that is inside or under our slab. And then I can't wait till we start getting into framing, and then electric, plumbing, HVAC, moving on to insulation, drywall, and the full finish out. We're gonna be filming every step of the way. You won't wanna miss this. Stay tuned. I appreciate y'all. See you in the next one.